Hello, my name's John with Vistas and Solutions, here to talk to you today a little bit about PKI enablement on your Layer7 API gateway. With the advent of multi-factor authentication, PKI is becoming increasingly more important as companies and organizations are trying to figure out how to require more authentication uses from users and from servers without having two custom solutions. PKI solves that in a couple different ways. So primarily it provides increased security. So instead of having a username or password, you have a certificate that has a password. That certificate is loaded into a browser or loaded into an application, and that can identify you. In that sense, it does satisfy one of the tenets of multi-factor authentication. It is something that you have. It also requires some sort of password on its installation, which is something you know, but once you enter that password in initially, typically certificates are not required to prompt or authenticate that password again after the initial installation. The other nice part about certificates is it automatically manages your lifecycle. So when you're talking about a username or password expiring every 60 days, 90 days, 180 days, all that is taken care of for you with a certificate. So there is an expiration date. At that point, that certificate has expired. You have to go back to the certificate authority or some sort of issuing body to get additional certificates. Hopefully, if the certificate authority is managing certificates properly, it will revoke certificates that are expired or that are reissued. So let's go into what that means a little bit for Layer7 API Gateway. So there's a couple places that we can enable certificates. One is on the Policy Manager login itself, which we'll go into in a second. And the other is when we start looking at trust. So within the gateway, we have the ability to add certificates, keys, and secrets. And so when we talk about trust, we're talking specifically about SSL, TLS, the ability to have requests and responses that are trusted by both sides of the equation, both sides of the server. So let's go into Manage Certificates. And you'll see we've got a couple certificates here already, couple certificate authorities. What we're going to do is we are going to import a new certificate authority. But before we do that, we have to create a certificate authority. And so I employed tinyscert.org as a way to create my own certificate authority. So a certificate authority is essentially another certificate that says I approve any certificates that are issued underneath me. So if you accept a certificate authority, you automatically accept every certificate that is ever issued or will ever be issued by that certificate authority. So typically CAs have a longer life cycle. So when we were talking about certificates earlier and their life cycle and how that's self-managed, certificate authorities have a longer life cycle in order to issue many certificates. So if a certificate has say a 2-year life cycle, a CA will probably have between a 5 to 10-year life cycle. And in that time, they would be issuing certificates, revoking certificates, managing all of that infrastructure, while at the same time ensuring that all of those certificates are being issued properly. So tinyscert.org, you can actually go in and create a free account. You can create a certificate authority. Typically, this is something that only large companies can handle. A certificate authority, a real certificate authority, is a very expensive process to go through. IdenTrust or any of the other larger certificate authorities is a very difficult, very expensive process. So the fact that we can do this for free is pretty great. So I've created this certificate authority here. I'm going to download this CA cert. So we have a CA cert. I've already installed it. and or already downloaded it rather, And so we are going to go into our gateway and we are going to install this. So we'll go into tasks, certificates, keys and secrets, manage certificates, and we'll come in, we're going to import a cert. So you'll see I'm prompted for a file. And so we can go into downloads because that is where this went. There's my downloads, and see I have a lot of things in my downloads folder. And let's go to that CA cert PEM. So we'll see this certificate is imported. We are going to import it as a trust anchor as well as a certificate chain. So this is what we recommend for any certificate authorities, to give it as many trust options as possible. Again, this doesn't change very often. We can see that we've got our CN is Vista Send Solutions CA. It is a secure digital signing. The organization is Vista Send Solutions. Location is Aurora, Colorado, United States. So we can import that and we will see it in here. And now we have a little bit more information about the certificate. This is something you could pull with OpenSSL or another certificate viewing program. But we do see here a couple things. We see that we have the issuer. So any certificates that are issued from this certificate authority will have this issuer signed as well. We can see that it's used for digital signature, key encipherment, agreement, certificate signing, and CRL signing. Typically, you would only see either digital signature or key encipherment, but because this is a general purpose certificate authority, they're gonna give you all of it. And then finally, the CRL is maintained over at TinyCert. So that's not something we're going to be getting into for this. And then we have my email address here too. So we have some options here. Now for certificate authorities, we tend to only check a certain number of these. So we don't need to worry about using this with an outbound SSL connection. We're not going to use this certificate to attach or connect to any other service. So we're going to leave that unchecked. Signing certificates for outbound SSL connections. Again, we are not going to be using this or any certificate that is signed or issued from this CA to an outbound SSL connection. So we're not going to check this. We are going to check the signing client certificates because we want to treat this as a certificate authority. And you can see a little bit more information about each one of these options down here as well. And then we're not using any sort of SAML capabilities in this gateway at this time, so we are going to keep these unchecked. We do want to validate that this certificate is a trust anchor, and we're not going to go through revocation checking. That is going to be probably a different video, as that gets pretty in-depth into certificates. So we are just going to save this off, and you will see that the usage is now changed to sign client. So again, for a certificate authority, this is a great use case. And so now we've got a trusted certificate. It doesn't really help us too much. So let's go into the second portion of this, which is talking about user certificates. And so if we're going to create another user, you'll see right now, let's go back into our identity providers. You'll see right now, we don't have any other users except for myself and Caleb, who just pushed a video out on gateway installation. So we are going to create a user, and you'll see we've got a username, a password, and then the confirmation of that. What we want to do first is we want to have a certificate issued. So we are going to use certificates to log into the policy manager. So this will save you the sometimes headache, but this will save you some of the issues of having to go in and forget a password, remember a password, expire a password. Now, like we had talked about before, all of your lifecycles for an account that's being used through a certificate is now managed by that certificate. So it makes things much easier. And so you can see we created a test for YouTube at vistasendsolutions.com email address. We are going to copy off this common name because it is going to be very important later. But we can see that the organizational unit is test, organization is same as the certificate authority, then we've got Aurora, Colorado, United States. So coming back into the internal user, where we would typically put something that would be referenced as a typical username. Maybe it's a first name, last name. When you're going to use a certificate CN, you want to use the common name or the CN of that certificate. So in this case, the username is going to be testforyoutube@vistasendsolutions.com. Now that is a long username. It's not something we're going to have to remember very often, so hang tight. And for a password, it doesn't matter, but we just have to satisfy the initial password requirements. And we will do that again. And so typically we would go to create and we would be fine here. Instead, we are going to go to define additional properties. Now these properties are going to be what give us the ability to log in with a certificate. So first, let's set we'll set just some information about this user. This is not something that's going to be validated against or checked, but this is just kind of a best practice, have some sort of identifying characteristics for this user account. And for roles, let's give them just the bare minimum. We'll do gateway maintenance. So they'll be able to log in, but they won't be able to see much here. Don't need to worry about a user group. Now for a user certificate, let's look at this. So we are going to click on import, and there are a couple different ways we can do this. So let's make this a little bit bigger. So you can retrieve via an SSL connection. So this would be if you went off to a server or a URL and pulled the certificate that they are presenting down. So if we went to google.com and we said next, we would pull the certificate information from google.com. That's not going to help us in this case. So we're not going to use that. We could import from a file, and then we would go into our downloads, which we have already downloaded this file, and we would take a look at that. And we would pull that information in, and we would be just fine. We could do that as well. The third option is if you have the certificate loaded, or if you have the PEM file already open, you do have the ability to copy and paste base64 PEM or the base64 string of your PEM file. If you don't know what a PEM file is, it's essentially the human readable kind of version of a certificate. So you'll have a header and a footer. They'll typically say begin certificate and end certificate, and then it'll have a bunch of base64 encoded text in between. Again, for this, we don't have the certificate copied or on our clipboard at all, so we are going to import from a file, and we've already pulled this information or pulled this file, and so we are going to go into our let's see, cert.pem, which is something that we had just downloaded. So we can see we installed that we downloaded that cert.pem file. And so we've got now our cert.pem file is imported or is loaded in here. We will hit the next button, and then you can see information about the certificate itself. So again, this is going to be both an information check as well as a validation check. Make sure that your certificate is correct, but it's also in a correct format. If your certificate is corrupted or the string is mismatched in any way, shape, or form, you will have issues, and you will see issues come up on here. So if you get an error here, my recommendation is to reinstall that certificate, to re-download that certificate, and then go through this process again. So we're going to click Finish, and now we can see that this user, test for YouTube at vistasensolutions.com, now has a certificate attached to it. So we don't need to worry about anything else in here. We've already set our roles and information. When we click OK, we'll see everything has been appropriately taken care of. We no longer need this window, and we are going to check our identity provider one more time and see that we've got this test for YouTube at Vista Send Solutions. So we have this user. So perfect, everything's going well so far. We are going to disconnect from our policy manager, and we are going to add this certificate into our policy manager trust store. We'll give it just a second. Okay, now that we've disconnected, let's connect back in, and we see we've always had this username and password, which we have entered in, but now we have the ability to add a client certificate as well. So we come in here into our certificate manager. The window that appears allows us to import a certificate. We went through a couple different variants on how to download and install this correctly. In the tinycert.org framework, we use the PKCS 12 archive. So this will require a password to unlock or decrypt that information. That password is going to be the same that you signed the certificate authority with. So when you create this CA, assuming you're using this, you are prompted for a password, which will be the password for all subsequent certificates that are issued. So let's import that right now. And we will pull this from the cert. See, it's got this little mail and a key icon with it. And down here, it's prompting me for my password. So now we see this user came through, test for YouTube at Vista Send Solutions. The certificate manager is pulling this in. It has all the required elements. And we clicked OK. We were immediately brought back to the policy manager login. And now, instead of needing a password, we can just click login. This allows users to manage their identity without needing passwords. Now, there are some downsides to certificates. It may not be right for your organization. We're going to go through some of the cons as well. The pros, we talked about the ability to have a standardized security. You can enable MFA very quickly, or multi-factor authentication very quickly. And then you have the ability to automate this management through lifecycles. When the certificate expires, it's done. You can't revalidate a password or refresh anything. It's just done. Some of the cons, this is a more complex solution. So certificates are inherently more complex. The pro being that they offer a little bit more security, but it is a more complex solution. There is also a cost associated. Now, we did see that with tinycert.org, we were able to complete this permission structure with zero cost. So that is something. And with any security infrastructure, with any security increase, there is always a risk of a vulnerability. So PKI on its own, implemented correctly, is inherently a very strong form of cybersecurity. However, if you implement things incorrectly, if you're not managing things correctly, this has the potential to introduce security issues. So we are experts in PKI authentication and implementation. We are happy to come in and take a look at your existing system if one exists, or recommend a solution if one does not exist, and we can walk you through all of this capability. So that was an overview on PKI certificates, both importing, adding certificate authorities, steps that you need to take to protect things appropriately, not give too many permissions, and then also bringing that into the policy manager so users can only connect through certain certificates and certain times. So again, my name is John with Vista Ascent Solutions. Have a great day. Talk to you later.